Okay, so the idea today is going to be um, thinking a bit, because me and Danny had this sort of long discussion organically, thinking about what we're calling philosophical methods and like how thinking more about how you get into the elenchus, but more importantly, where do you go from there? There are other Platonic dialectical methods that built out of them, but there's actually like an educational model behind them. We might think of, as Josh and Tyrell also pointed out, a user journey that builds upon itself and is connected thematically to the previous ones. And there are both lessons from ed tech and from the history of making philosophical educational curriculums that might give us some food for thought to think about that. And Len, as we're soon going to find out, covers that whole territory. So real quick, just for the agenda, I'm going to try to keep it short. We're running a little late, but I still want to keep it to 30 minutes-ish, so we have lots of time for discussion. That said, I'm going to be doing this in a sort of open interview format with Len, sort of prodding him questions, maybe adding my own perspectives. And I really encourage you to jump in. And if it turns out people would rather just on different slides interrupt, ask questions, this format's designed for that. So don't feel like you're slowing down the process here. If things come up organically, we can just do it then instead of at the end. I just want to make sure it's sort of as much discussion oriented as possible. That said, I am really going to try to keep this roughly on time so that we really open up just good food for thought for things as we sort of think about what it means to deepen one's philosophical thinking and philosophical way of life and what Khora's role is in that process. So very quick, this is my summary of how I was going to describe the task that the discussion with Danny was helping at least me think about. How can Khora's methods, for now Platonic elenchus, and then the method of hypothesis, provide a connected, deepening, and user-centered, in our language, I would just say student-centered, experience that hones participants' ability to engage with their deepest questions and values. To do that, I want to explain a little bit about who Len is and why we're having this conversation. So I'm just going to just give a little background of sort of why it's not just to prove why he's a good person, but I think he has some sort of interesting life experience here that we can also pull on in the discussion at the sort of intersections which we're naturally working at. So now I'm going to hand it over to Len a little bit to talk about, yeah, just you don't have to give the full biography, but sort of 4 minutes here. What do you think are the highlights of sort of lessons learned about building philosophical and educational curriculums that you sort of developed throughout your career? And what are the maybe interesting and less traditional aspects that have been a part of your story?
Sure. Well, I think, we can actually pass on immediately then to the first slide, or the slide where we kind of talk about the general problems and the like. Okay, so one of the things that I found, I wrote a book about online education called Education 2.0, and another book about MOOCs, massive online courses. And what had happened with the massive online courses, actually, it happened with a lot of online education, was that it was isolated and didactic. And often it wasn't connected to anything. So a student would sign up for a MOOC, the topic looked interesting, and within 12 minutes, they were gone. The completion rates, even for the first session, were low, and then the students didn't come back. And so if 2012 was hailed as the year of the MOOC, when the MOOC was the person of the year in Time magazine, by 2013, everyone was talking about the total failure of MOOCs. MOOCs were a flop because nobody was actually engaging. And so what were the problems? Okay, so these are the big highlights I got from that particular course. First of all, the pedagogy was terrible. It was like the worst of the old pedagogy, people giving lectures. Nobody's interested in lectures, basically, or maybe they're interested in a part of a lecture for a few minutes, but you're not going to engage people by having information because now information is ubiquitous. The other big lesson was that uh, it wasn't tied to anything. The people who developed the first MOOCs in Coursera and edX thought, well, we're going to give them Harvard physics, we're going to MIT chemistry, and certainly if employers and other colleges are going to give them credit for chemistry from Podunk, certainly they'll give them credit for chemistry from MIT. It turned out, no, they wouldn't, because all of those other courses and programs were tied in a system. The system recognized those credits and you get a degree, and colleges and universities could then grant the degrees and employers could see he has a degree. So if you just have a MOOC and you kind of, seen the lectures and answered the questions, it doesn't tie to anything. It's just sort of sitting there freely. And the other colleges won't accept it because it's not part of the same system. So MIT will accept a credit from Podunk, but will not accept a credit even from MIT chemistry if it's not connected to the system. And the third thing that we realized was that learning is social. People come, you ask kids, why do you go to school? They say, oh, to be with my friends and have fun. Kids don't go to school to learn algebra. They go to school to hang out. And if you don't have a experience of being with other people, of experiencing the joy of being together, it's not an attractor. So what happened in the first phase of MOOCs is that they were isolated, they were disconnected, and they were not social. And in the second stage, people began to rectify this. And so they said, okay, how can we make it better didactically? And so they tied in with the whole educational psychology and ed tech community. At first, they hadn't done that. And they found that these relationships were really productive, that there were people who actually knew better than they did how to organize interaction in learning. The second thing was they created badges. So you had something to show, something you could, please don't do that, Monica. Okay, I'm very leery because my computer is extremely sensitive this morning, and any shaking and it will go right out. So my wife is trying to help me adjust the table, and I'm worried that, okay. So they saw that you could create something that could be recognized somewhere for something. Then some colleges and universities began to think, well, we can recognize those badges for credit. So it kind of got brought into a larger system of meaning. And the third thing was they could make online learning social. So some upshots from this might be, how does Palinode fit into a larger system? How does it connect up to the rest of a person's life, socially and occupationally? And secondly, how can Palinode be made social? For example, the Palinode community, where people identify themselves as being Palinoders. They have a T-shirt that says "I'm Palinode." They recognize each other on the street. They meet together with meetups in the library. A good example, I think, of this was NaNoWriMo. Eli, do you know what NaNoWriMo is?
No, I don't know this one.
Does anybody else know what NaNoWriMo is?
It's the monthly writing challenge, right?
That's exactly it. Okay. So NaNoWriMo started basically when somebody had the idea that everybody thinks, I've got a book in me. And like children like to write. Even second graders, good teachers have second graders write a book. Even if the kids can't write, they can like dictate their book. And so NaNoWriMo started as a program. It gets everybody organized for November. And in November, people get together all over the world to write novels. Now, what what NaNoWriMo does, first it tells them, you don't have a plot, it doesn't matter. All novels don't necessarily have plots. Well, they'll discover a plot halfway in. The most important thing is you got to write 50,000 words. Okay? When you go to the local library in November and you'll go right until closing hour, you'll find NaNoWriMos. If you go to McDonald's after closing hours in the library, you're going to find NaNoWriMoers in every McDonald's. And it's all kind of organic. It's like all these library meetings and the like, it starts from local chapters. So there's like a Connecticut NaNoWriMo organization. And then what NaNoWriMo does is it feeds people prompts. It doesn't give you writing lessons, but it gives you a kind of a library full of prompts, suggestions, tips, and like, and when you get together with your other NaNoWriMers, everybody's already writing, right? You got only November. And the idea is you can't cheat. You can't start in October. You have to start your novel November 1st. And you turn it in November 30th. Well, by November 30th or 31st, whatever, and the like. So it's a tremendously effective organization that's grown all over the world. Why? People love getting together. People love getting together around a common project. So I think there's an important lesson in that. When MOOCs turn to the quest of how do we make this social, one of the tricks was libraries. So in edX, the city of Boston said, okay, we will open our libraries every evening for edX. And so maybe there's like 20 different courses on edX that have a big population in the Boston area. Great. So we have 20 different tables in the library, and people get together to do their MOOC work together. They get together, do their MOOC work to talk it out. Philosophy started as a social activity.
Maybe that's
Socrates around the the agora, and he attracted people to talk to him, kind of disgruntled youth and the like, and they put words into their mouths. I don't think there's really any way of thinking about philosophy that doesn't involve something social. It's not about listening and writing. It's about it's something creative about being social. You get together with other people, and as Dewey says, you get deep into a conversation, and it's unclear who said what. You know, the words are just kind of flowing, and you kind of lose your narrow boundaries, and a kind of creative space is open to say something even you didn't know you were going to say, that even you had never thought about. So, libraries are one. I'm going to tell you just about a couple of other MOOCs that I think have a similar bearing on this. Okay.
Yeah, I would do let's do like 3 minutes and then shift over because I like the Socrates.
No, that's good. That's good. I think these have important lessons. So in one MOOC by a guy named Michael Lennox, it was about business strategy, and there's a million business strategy courses on MOOCs. But what he did is he went to 100 different small companies and asked, can you take on another person in business strategy? And then he had 10,000 students, and he was able to distribute them to these companies. And all of them had a real role contributing to discussions like this one on business strategy. And then the students met with company leaders, they met with other people, they had something that was fun, that connected them to others, that gave them something to do, and it was continuous with the rest of their life. So I mentioned Boston X would have libraries. There have been road shows. Michael Goldberg, he had 40,000 people in his MOOC. He took it on the road. He would have a meeting in Singapore, he'd have a meeting in Hong Kong, meeting in Dublin. And so he would show up at the local libraries or local performance places or whatever, and bring the discussion person to large groups of people meeting together. So it was no longer an individualized affair. And so I guess that's the key point I'm trying to make here. Ways of making Palinode a Palinode social activity is going to be one way of bringing people in because people want a social activity.
Just quickly, Toph, I can't find her. Tell her maybe, can you resend her the link? She may be in the wrong room.
Yep.
Yeah, whoops, sorry. So actually to follow up on that sort of bridge, which you were discussing earlier, whoops, I'm going the wrong way here. Can you speak a little more about what you think philosophy did, in particular, the sort of, you were mentioning philosophy sort of attentiveness to the social circumstance and utilizing that. Can you talk a little bit what you think Socrates did, given the sort of higher education, what people thought learning was, why it wasn't working, and the ways he tried to attend to it that were sort of in this way also sensitive to people's experience and meeting it there?
Yeah. Well, I think the key thing is when you think about Socrates, you're thinking about an individual. But I think that that's a mistake. I mean, you know that he's in the agora. Okay, it's a marketplace. It's a place for people, a lot of people. Okay, and so he has young people who just attracted him because they heard there's this guy there who's like saying things that are really kind of controversial. So they go. But in behind that, there is the paideia. There is Greek life. There is the theater. There's Sophocles. There is Greek architecture and Greek art and lyric poetry and Hesiod and Homer. And so the young people from that class are already surrounded by a world of meanings. They don't just show up to Socrates naked, okay? And so when Socrates is talking to them, they've already got a bunch of stuff that they've, about the gods, about God's action on life and the like. So I think the first thing is Socrates is working in a social context. So what is the social context of Palinode? And I have to realize every individual has their own social context. So just as you had these disgruntled people, we have them in our own life as well, right? We have people who just fall into various patterns. We have the typical person who wants to go to college to get a job, but there are people who are already kind of not satisfied with that. That life doesn't look meaningful to them. So there is the background of meanings, and then there is the rational discourse. And so it's exciting against that background. So like I said, the lesson about that is, what is your model Palinodian? Right? The Palinodian is sort of like the person who goes to Socrates. They're not satisfied with the narrative that's handed to them.
And then we will go to speaking of that, some of these other figures. So we talked a little bit about this first one, sort of from the Socratic model of, sensitively responding to what's unsatisfactory, what people feel like is missing from a deeper learning experience, especially that I think is, not at the sort of elementary, basic foundational level. Um, we talked a little bit about the public space. Maybe you can talk about, from a Deweyan perspective, a little bit about the second two bullets, particularly what it means to get people to be lured to and engage with something that feels authentic and contextualized to their experience, and then how do you build a sort of sequence journey out of that? And what does
Well,
philosophy teach us about
yeah,
that?
sure. Well, let's talk about Dewey's story for just a moment. So Dewey has these beautiful maps in the School and Society, where he pictures the school as a bunch of activity areas, and it looks just like an apartment, basically. There's a kitchen, a dining room, a garden, a shop, a sewing room, and the like. And so students enter the school. In a way, it's the same story, right? Students enter with a world of meanings. So, like, every 5-year-old knows that his mother bakes cookies, or that his father works in the shop after he comes home from work and the like. And so there's a continuity. Children want to grow up. They want to be like their parents. So there's a complete continuity between the home and the school. Kids continue the activity of the home in the school. But when they run into problems, there are places for reflection. First of all, there is the social meeting center attached to each activity area. So, like for example, kids are going to draw some pictures for a rug they're going to sew in the sewing room, and they say, "Well, what colors are good?" And so the teacher says, "Well, let's find out." Okay, so there's a place for reflection right at the point of activity. Kids are going to make lunch, right? Because making lunch is something you have to do when you live in. So they're going to make lunch. We're going to have egg salad. How many eggs? Well, how many kids do we have? Well, how many eggs per kid? Uh, how long do we boil the eggs? So these are all questions that require inquiry or reflection. And then there are special places for that. For example, there's the science room where you can go boil an egg for 2 minutes or 5 minutes or 7 minutes and see how good it is. So the whole setup is people bring in meanings. They bring in a world of meanings and a desire already to extend these meanings. You know, they want to be better. They want to be able to do like mom, bake a real cake, or garden, grow fruit, or grow vegetables, and then you set them to work. And when they run into, it's kind of like elenchus, right? You set them to work, and they run into an impasse. They recognize, I don't know what I'm doing. Everything I thought was wrong. And then there's a place for them to go through that.
And that's why you start with those topics, as Danny well says, right? Like courage or something else that comes out of these natural conversations that people imagine in their life world are important. It makes
Yeah.
sense to them. They're interested in talking about it. It's not
What could be
haphazard.
what could be more important in school than courage, right? You're a little guy and you go out into into the schoolyard, people start beating up on you,
And
right?
yeah.
And you go home and you tell your mom, it's like it's unsafe and I'm getting beat up. And your mother says, you have to stand up to them.
Yeah, I'm gonna jump. I would want to do more here, but for the sake of time, so we at least have good 20 minutes for discussion. Let's move to some of the Neo-Confucian Academy lessons. I think
Wow, that
particular,
was a good job. I
yeah,
think, well,
the
okay.
social part is the connection. Speak a little more about how the social builds an experience
Eli,
and
can we,
community deepening.
yeah, can we go back just for 1 second? But
Yeah.
I want to talk about courage, okay, or virtues. So there is a worldwide program called Philosophy for Children. And Philosophy for Children, I think, has a ton of lessons for all of us to learn. Hold on just a second. I have a noise going on in my house. Veronica?
Yeah, while we do that, I'll point for here with sort of the models. We can talk a little bit during, if we don't have time during the lecture. These are a few schools that have, I think, really thoughtful ways about how you go from this primary social experience to something that's sequential and builds upon itself. Like to the point, just to fill in some, we weren't able to on this slide. What you want to avoid, and actually the philosophical curriculum is really thought hard about, is you don't want a bunch of the lessons you do. Let's say you're in the Hellenistic period and you're in a uh, a Neoplatonic school, that you take a bunch of courses, sessions with your mentor, and they don't add up to anything. They just feel like random different life lessons. So there's been many attempts iteratively to go from, okay, how do you go from that social experience and real problem? This is where I think it's just very closer to sort of a user journey design story, that something builds up and feels like a whole, and a whole that's relevant to my life. So back to courage, and then to our Confucians. Or we can go the philosophy for children actually as
I
well.
want to talk about it just a bit because look, when philosophy for children, the way philosophy for children works is there are prompts, and the prompts typically are a storybook written by Matthew Lipman, but now more and more storybooks. And these stories raise philosophical questions. So there could be a story about a little kid and goes to school and gets beat up in the schoolyard and the like. And then the kids say, well, what's the question? And the kids have to actually discuss what's the question. And then they just have their say. And then at the end, the teacher kind of summarizes, oh, I've got this theory and this theory of courage and that theory of courage. So they don't get courage lessons at any point. The issue comes directly out of their own lives as prompted. So when you think about Palinode, I mean, just as a kind of extension, there could be Palinode texts, the Palinode textbook, as you will, of philosophically rich stories that become like canonical within the community and that people discuss. They kind of raise deeper philosophical questions, and a kind of open discussion about them becomes part of the experience of the platform.
And just to add to like another that does this, St. John's, which Toph well knows, and I've mentioned a few times to you all, but I'll just give an example from a very famous American philosopher, Richard Dick Bernstein, who went to a previous version of a similar kind of curriculum at University of Chicago. And he's not a classics guy. He's, modern, experimental, contemporary philosophy. So I asked him about doing a St. John's curriculum where you read all the great books of Western civilization in a sequential order, and everyone in your whole school does it in the same grade level you are in a cohort. And he said to me, my experience of it was really interesting people reading the same set of books. I'm not sure it so much mattered that it was exactly those books, but I can be confident that there was something about having the center access that was a shared social experience. That is what
Right.
made it really stick for people and feel powerful and exciting and got people talking.
Yeah, that's good. We can take a quick look at contemporary civilization in the West, which in many places, including the University of Chicago and Columbia, Queens College, etc., was the introduction to philosophy. It had a textbook. It was all readings. And so it had, Aristotle on friendship and Plato on the cave and Socrates on his apology and all of this. And the way it worked, the pedagogy, was that the teacher would come in, put a couple of paragraphs up on the screen or read them, and then shut up. It was like, let the stimulus do its job. Let Socrates making fun of the jury do its job. And then people just start to talk. And the one thing I want to say, because we've talked about the social aspect, but I want to also talk about the communicative aspect. The only way you can learn philosophy is to get words coming out of your mouth. When we give lectures, we're showing how smart we are. Presumably, we're trying to stimulate something, but we're not making much space for it. But our job is to get words out of our students' mouths so that we can hear them, appreciate them, and sometimes like put in a correction or put in a kind of a new direction or augmentation or something like that. So just having a teacher and a student doing things that are just written, I just don't think it's enough. You do not get a feel for making a philosophical move, making an argument, seeing how it's received by writing.
That's an interesting one. Would be good for discussion. We have 2 minutes before I want to jump here to sort of this open discussion. So let's just do, I think the most important one is a little bit about the qualitative and selective scaling. I think that's the most interesting thing. We're both interested in this in the Confucian model. I'll just add one thing and then let Len add anything he wants. That one of the things that happened in the Ming Dynasty out of the Wangyang Ming school of Neo-Confucianism, of Dao Shui, was this idea that when you scale and build attention to help people think about living lives of deep philosophical meaning, you cannot expect, nor would it be fair to somehow that we're going to get everyone in some massive general education movement. What we can do is to build a dynamic relationship between the public and, you know, the nerds, let's say. So they did these series of like once a month public lectures across rural China that used to get these huge, surprisingly huge audiences, thousands of people, to talk about character questions. They were very sort of open public things, you know, what's it to be a good person? How do I relate to others? How do I honor my parents? What's ritual like? And then for people who are excited about that model of living, you could go to the Confucian school. And those people and then would go out themselves and build new Confucian academies and do new public lectures. So what I always thought was interesting about this is, and even one of the most important figures whose name I botched because I don't have the intonation, so Teresa will know that wins at this a little bit, Zhu Xi, is that he always thought if you want to make autonomous groups of people who can live thoughtfully together, the task is not to get everyone, but to have little bright lights in a really rough landscape. So if you have enough little enclaves going out in the world, that's enough. You know, people will see that there's an alternative if it's visible broadly enough, that there's those weird people over there doing something a little bit differently. So I thought, like, what's always struck me about them is scaling is not, it does mean you want to be like famous, like, Facebook blows up, right? And then everyone uses it. But I think one of the things you can learn from the Confucian model that they're really good about thinking is like, well, what's the kind of attention and how much and for whom? How deep, other words, in the curriculum is everyone going to get? You want to make it as open as possible for people to do the advanced stuff. Everyone should have the opportunity. And in fact, people like the founders of the neoclassicists were really strong on this, that everyone is capable of this, but not everyone's going to go to the same depth. So our job is to get some people into the public lecture and then make channels for the people who want to join the modern Stoicism group, or maybe go to St. John's, or go to Habib, Pakistan, and work on this cultural repair project. I'm already over time here, but Len, anything you want to add before we wrap up here and then just do
Well,
some real
I think
questions?
it's good. Look, Confucian education basically is the very, very close reading of texts and of classical canonical texts, and then milking them for their contemporary relevance. And not everybody's going to read all 5 books and all 4 books in a very, very close reading over 4 or 5 years. But the leaders can. I mean, remember that the people who went to the Confucian schools were already in a certain caste. And what we're thinking of, and I think they were thinking of this in St. John's, like, these are our leaders. It's not just, and the people who passed the exam at the local level maybe didn't pass the exam at the national level. They weren't, admitted to the academy in Beijing, but they could still be leaders in their community. And the people who were the leaders had a common reference point with them. There was a certain kind of cultural literacy that went throughout the entire society, because the leaders at every level, even if they hadn't passed the exams, were still conversant, were still capable to enter into a discussion. So I think, it's a very important thing. What are we trying to do? A 4-year course in Stoicism is one thing. The annual Stoicon is another, right? But and maybe Palinode has to think about that. If we have like and look, a lot of online programs have that, right? They have the paid level and the free model, or they have the super every week model, and they have the occasional free course model.
So I'm going to stop there just so we can have some time for discussion. Thanks for everyone for listening.